All right, so let's begin tonight with, I'd be looking for a motion to approve the consent agenda items 1 through 5.
So moved.
Second.
The motion is second, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed. Consent agenda is approved. And at this time, we have some members of the Washington Public Utility Districts Association here to offer a presentation, so feel free. Jane, are you gonna introduce everyone?
Yeah.
Okay,
And we're all gonna have a part in this.
Okay.
Somehow, I wasn't there at the office when they selected who got to start, but on behalf of the Washington PUD Association, I'm Commissioner Jane Van Dyke from Clark Public Utilities, and I am currently serving as Secretary of the Association. So I got to come on, this is my second meeting of these trips, but under this theme of reunited, and we have a little slide presentation. Our president of the association, Gary Arsenault, decided we hadn't really seen each other, and lots of things were happening in our districts around the state. So we've embarked on an ambitious project to visit all the PUDs in the state. Hasn't been completed yet, but we're hoping the next few months or so to finish it up. And with me today for presenting, we have Liz Anderson. And let's see, titles are always hard. Deputy Executive Director, and George Kahn, the Executive Director of the Association. And I don't even know what your title is these days, Stephanie.
Senior Policy Specialist.
So Stephanie, oh, and gosh, then say, oh, I can't remember your last name. Sabusa. Always, we're so friendly. Senior Policy with our working on our water issues. So, and as we can, there we are, and are working cooperatively with all of you. And we had a chance to talk with your staff a little bit before the meeting started. And I think some of the things that I want to say in the public meeting that we're working on your behalf are things that I think everyone's interested in. And particularly, you may have read in our reports, our 321 report, which is our updated legislative report, or in our Friday Facts, which is our weekly newsletter about the work that's being done on the summer moratorium shut-off moratorium on behalf of utilities, as we all recognize that's really a problem of how stopping shutoffs during the summer is just creates a big problem for utilities, and we're following that closely in the legislature. And we also had a chance to talk about the Public Works Fund and keeping that ending date in June, which continues to been taken away from us. And we've heard how important it was to Skagit PUD getting those funds to help them with your different projects. And it's true for Clark PUD also has a water utility. So we've used those funds that well, and it hasn't been available to PUDs in the last number of years. And we're going to talk a little bit about the history of the PUDs and PUDs Association with Liz. George is going to talk a little about the legislature, and Stephanie is going to talk specifically about water issues. So with that, I think we're ready to do the slideshow.
Well, I'm going to get up first.
Oh, you're going to come first. Sorry,
That's right.
Wrong order.
That's okay. Apparently, I didn't do a great job the last time, so she tried to skip over me this time. So thanks. So it's really a pleasure to be here. I'm George Kahn, the director of the association. I've taken a number of trips up to Skagit. You guys have a great public utility districts. We're glad you're part of the association. We had a really great meeting this morning. We've got a whole to-do list, George, for things to bring back, which is good for me, bad for them, but you know how that is. And we even liked it so much that I took them, courtesy of Google Maps, to a tour of your water tower, because it took me to the wrong PUD location. But that's to blame Google Maps, not me, right? But they won't let me take them back. It really is a pleasure to be here. It's good to meet you, new commissioner. And it's wonderful to be able to reunite with PUDs, see what great work you're doing, meet with your staff. We're all committed to doing such a great job on behalf of your community and in fact, in behalf of the entire state, because that's what PUDs are here for. So with that, as a good executive director, I'm going to turn it over to the great staff who's going to give a presentation. Liz will start, Stephanie, and then we'll be back to answer your question. And please feel free to ask any questions or provide any comments you have. So with that.
So I understand I have to move. So, okay. Oh, wow. You are giving me mission control. Okay, don't go far, please. So it's great to see all of you, and it's great to be back up at Skagit PUD. We've always had just great productive meetings up here, and you live in just an amazing area. It's so beautiful. So we feel spoiled being able to come up here and see all of you and see the natural beauty of your county. So when we decided to do these reunited visits, we recognized that there were a lot of new faces at the PUDs. There were a lot of new commissioners at the PUDs, and not everybody really knew all the resources and services that were available to them through the PUD Association. And then when we started having conversations, we recognized that even people who had been at their PUDs for quite some time didn't know everything that was available to them. So we wanted to take some time to reacquaint you with the association. Now, here's the good news. I can go through this pretty quickly because when I look through the audience here, this room, Skagit PUD is so engaged in the association that a lot of this will look very familiar to you. So I'll just touch on a few things and feel free to ask questions as we go along. And I'm going to try to make technology work. Okay. Oh, I love it when plan comes together. So in case you don't have us already on your speed dial, this is us, and feel free to reach out to us at any time, of course. So I wanted to talk a little bit, just a few minutes about our history, because the way we function today as an association is really reflective of that history. The Washington PUD Association actually started as the Washington PUD Commissioners Association in 1936. So 6 years after initiative number 1 was passed by the people of Washington, allowing formation of public utility districts. 1936 was a significant year because there was a constitutional challenge to the PUD law. And fortunately, we were victorious in that challenge. At that time, the key driver behind the PUD movement, the Washington State Grange, decided to call together the existing PUD commissioners. And there were several PUDs that had formed by that time. And basically, the Grange master said to these commissioners, I'm handing over the leadership of the future of these organizations to you. You're going to drive the future. And the Grange did a lot of brilliant things in the PUD campaign, and I know you know the history. And one of the things they did was bringing those commissioners together because they recognized the collective powerful voice of those individuals speaking in unison. And so the Washington PUD Commissioners Association was formed. It changed in 1952. At that time, there was recognition within the association that there needed to be a real focus on operational excellence, because if PUDs weren't doing a really good job of serving their communities, that really opened the door for opponents of PUDs to step in and try to undermine PUD authorities or make it difficult to serve their customers. So at that time, you saw the expansion of services, which is reflective of where we are today. So there's training, there's the information sharing and collaboration. This is our mission. We're here to support you. And we appreciate hearing what your needs are, because much of what we do, in fact, all of what we do because it meets your needs. Here's our services that we provide, again, falling into those 4 categories that I touched on briefly. I hope these faces are familiar to you. They are the faces of our WPUTA team. One thing we all agree on is these pictures are woefully old. They're out of date, but you have various opinions on whether they should be replaced. So they haven't been replaced yet, but hopefully they look familiar to you. And the one thing I want to point out about this group of people, there is more than 100 years of utility experience represented on this screen. There's a tremendous amount of knowledge And these are really dedicated professionals here to help you out in any way possible. Our structure reflects on that meeting in 1936. We're still a commissioner-driven organization. And you see that in our board of directors. As you know, they set the strategic direction. You have a voice on that board. You're part of that process. Our executive committee and our executive officers are elected commissioners for the most part. And you have an opportunity to serve in that capacity if you would like to run for one of those positions. And then we have our policy committees, and you're very much active in those policy committees where we really take a deeper dive on the issues impacting PUDs and start talking about how we can work collaboratively together to address the important topics that we want to focus on. And there's a variety of other committees that I know you're very engaged in. The one thing that I think is really important on this slide really is the professional roundtables. And again, your staff, they participate in these. It's really a time for professional groups to get together and share information and receive training. One of the great things about PUDs is we don't compete with each other. We support each other. So that gets back to that operational excellence. Let's not reinvent the wheel if we don't have to reinvent the wheel. If you need something, you want information as Skagit PUD, you want to know what other PUDs are doing, we'll do that for you. We'll coordinate that effort to make sure you're getting that information. Our meetings, you attend our meetings and we really appreciate that, and you're represented on those committees. One thing that I did want to point out is all members are welcome. That means any member of your staff can sit in on a committee meeting. And if you've got a new member to your team, someone who's wanting to know more about public utility districts or the industry in general, it's a really good education tool to have them just sit in and learn a little bit more as time is available. We'll talk a little bit about advocacy. I'm going to hand it over to Stephanie here in just a minute, but just a reminder, policy direction, the things that we focus on are set by the members and it's guided by our strategic plan, but we also go through the process of vetting specific issues that we really want to focus on in the legislature and in Congress. And the association has the ability to lend strength, not just to the entire family of PUDs, but for individual PUDs or smaller groups of PUDs. So we represent about half of the legislative districts in Washington state collectively, almost all the congressional districts. So that means we have a lot more power working together. And in fact, there's issues that we've worked on just recently that have been focused on an individual PUD. And we're working on an issue that's impacting all of you, which is seeking out some funding for utility relocates associated with State Department of Transportation court mandated culvert repair projects. So we know that's putting a real stress on capital budgets. It's mainly impacting the PUDs in Northwest Washington, smaller group, but you know what? The entire family of PUDs is behind you. So this, trust me, I won't go through all these, but the point here is that our advocacy services are really intended to connect you with the policy work that's happening in the legislature and in Washington, D.C. By providing you a variety of resources. So if you have 5 minutes to spend on looking through what's happening, we have documents that will allow you to do that in 5 minutes. So it's going to keep you connected without having to be in Olympia at the state legislature or in Washington, D.C. I will tell you, most of these things did not exist 10 years ago. And they came about because members wanted more resources. And so we developed these things. So if there's something that you see that would be useful to you, a new kind of tool, let us know. We'll look at it and try to add it. All right. Yeah, you bet.
I want to say that when you brought Representative Fitzgibbon to the water conference in Spokane, that was a big deal. I think, and I don't know if it's not what I expected, but it was delightful just because, just from the water perspective, you know, you have this captive audience, to be able to have a dialogue about that, and then know that you can turn around and take that, because his voice in conversation with the governor about, look, this isn't about funding, this is just about getting DOT to do better, college to do better, when they-
Right.
And to me, that was really, you know, on the advocacy side, where I came back and said, this is one, you know, our continued support to what I see it now, right? It was one of those where you're like, okay, of course, everything's all well and good, and then it turns into, okay, no, now we were actually getting traction. And so I wanted to share, that's something that I called out and said, right, this is
Yeah.
very useful, and more of that, if we can keep that going.
You bet.
that's-
Yeah, thank you very much for that. And Stephanie organizes the water workshop and does a great job of doing that and trying to make sure that we're bringing in those policymakers and getting their insights. And we do that in other ways as well. Just at our last meeting, this was more energy focused, but we had the chair of the Senate Environment, Energy, and Telecommunications Committee. So the new chair and someone that we really needed to hear what he was thinking, but also give us an opportunity to have that dialogue, right? And build those relationships, those working relationships, so they know who we are as PUDs and why we approach issues the way we do. So I appreciate that, because I think that is a really important part of the collective work we do as PUDs. I'm going to hand it over to Stephanie to talk a little bit more about issues that I know you're very concerned about, and touch on that, and then we'll just wrap up real quick. And if you have any feedback, we'll be looking forward to that. Stephanie, do you want to? Actually, I can probably bring the microphone over to you if you want to do that. Yeah, let's. There you go. Okay.
Okay, so my name is Stephanie Zellapuzza, and I'm the Senior Policy Specialist for the PUD Association. And in that role, I work on water and telecommunications policy for the association. And a big part of what we do is advocacy on behalf of the PUDs. And I thought a good way to illustrate that would be to give some examples of some of the work we've done. On the broadband side, a great example of that is the work that we've done working with the 3 state level broadband funding agencies, which are the Public Works Board, the Community Economic Revitalization Board, and the Washington State Broadband Office. The Public Works Board and the Washington State Broadband Office both held their first broadband funding cycles in 2021. And both of those programs included a challenge period for incumbent service providers to show that an area is already served and therefore shouldn't be prioritized for funding. So once those first funding cycles were concluded, we started hearing feedback from our members saying that the challenge processes had been used in ways that blocked the funding to areas that were legitimately unserved or underserved, and that the way that the challenge processes were structured made it easy for them to be used to block funding rather than to make sure that service wasn't being overbuilt to areas that already had it. And we knew that was a problem, and we heard those concerns from multiple members. So we met with each of the PUDs who were denied funding due to objections. And then we got their feedback and we shared it with the agencies. And those agencies took that feedback and have used it to modify their programs, but they've gone about it in different ways. The Public Works Board, we met with their staff leadership several times last year to discuss the feedback that we received. And we participated in their meetings. George participated in a panel of stakeholders that they had at their board meeting last summer. And the Public Works Board ultimately felt like they needed additional authority in order to modify their application process as needed. So they introduced a bill last year and we supported that bill. And that bill that legislation created a pre-application period for their funding program, and then moved the objection process earlier in the application cycle. So that way, if there was an objection from a provider, the applicant could meet with the provider, have a conversation about it, and make changes to their application. If there's a portion of the service area that was already served, they could take that out of their application and focus on the area that needed service and move forward with their funding application and provide service to those areas. So the Public Works Board put forward that bill and we supported it, and it was signed into law last year. And now they're beginning to implement those changes by going through a public rulemaking process, which we've also participated in and submitted written comments. So we're staying involved in that process. And then on the other side, the Washington State Broadband Office felt that they didn't need additional authority in order to modify their programs. So they approached it a little bit differently. Last spring, they held some informal listening sessions to get feedback on their grant funding program and what needed to be changed for future funding cycles. And after the listening sessions were concluded, they hired a new director. And that director felt that they needed a more formal process, and they built a formal written comment period, which started last September. And they provided a list of questions which centered on 5 themes: open access, matching funds, digital equity, and defining last mile, and the challenge process was part of that list of questions. So the director of the State Broadband Office came and spoke at our July Telecom Committee meeting last year, and then came in September to do more of a listening session and have more of a dialogue on the changes that our members felt were needed with their funding program. And we shared our feedback with the broadband office. We had multiple conversations, and then we also participated in a stakeholder workshop that the State Broadband Office held at the end of the year prior to opening their second funding cycle. And then during their second funding cycle, which closed January 17th, some of those changes that we advocated for were incorporated, and some were incorporated in ways that that may or may not achieve the ultimate benefit, or the ultimate outcome that we were looking for. So we're continuing to work with the State Broadband Office and see how that plays out as they go through their objection process right now, to see how their changes affect the program, and if the outcome comes out to ultimately be that the areas that need service get service, because that's what we're all trying to do. The reason that that's really important is the State Broadband Office is going to be in charge of allocating the upcoming BEAD funding, which is estimated to be a potential $900 million for our state. So we're staying very involved in that process. We want to make sure that the process used to distribute those funds is fair and equitable and results in the areas that aren't served with broadband getting service, whether that's through the PUDs or through the existing service providers. Everyone should have access to broadband service. And then, as another example of our advocacy, that's kind of a shorter term example, last year in the legislative session, there was a bill introduced which would have required any water systems with over 5,000 connections to include an analysis of the costs and benefits of fluoridation when they develop their water system plan, even if the system's customers didn't want fluoridation. You would still have to conduct that study. So we worked with other industry groups and the bill sponsor to modify the bill language to be permissive and allow that to happen rather than requiring it. And then ultimately the bill didn't pass during last year's session, but a budget proviso was included in the final budget, which provided funding to the Department of Health to offer engineering assistance to non-fluoridated systems that were interested in looking at fluoridation, whose customers were interested in looking at fluoridation, to complete health equity assessments. And then this year, there's legislation that's been introduced and supported by the Dental Association, which would not require any sort of fluoridation, but would require systems that currently fluoridate their water to request community input before deciding to discontinue that, but it would not affect systems that are not currently fluoridating their water. And so we're keeping an eye on that just to make sure there aren't any changes with it, but that's kind of a shorter term example of some of the advocacy work that we do. Do you have any questions?
Questions, Stephanie?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I just have a couple more slides. I'm going to speed through this so we can conclude. Training education, I think you're all very familiar with the opportunities. I encourage you to continue to do that. And one thing I did want to point out is that if there's ever a need within your utility for some specific training or consultation, we're happy to arrange that. We've done that for various PUDs if you have one specific need for your utility. And just go to the next one there. And next one, those are pretty pictures. All right. And then you're all familiar with you brought up the water workshop and appreciate your participation in that. The one thing I did want to point out on this is that you do have the ability to, again, share information with other PUDs. So we have surveys that we collect. If you have a question or say you want to enact a new policy, and you want to see what other PUDs are doing, you can send that question in to us. We gather all that information from our PUDs. We survey them, compile it, give you a full report, including any documents that are appropriate. And you have that information, and then we archive that for access to any member. So again, operational excellence, we're not recreating the wheel. And about 90% of the time when a PUD has a question, it's in our surveys. So just remember that's a resource for you. And with that, I think we'll call Jane back up for a few concluding comments. And I really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Well, exactly what I was going to say, of course. Thank you very much for your time and attention. I hope this information was helpful and made you think of some things and some questions you might have for us. And we're glad you're part of the PUD Association, helping us be a part of that collective voice that supports us all. So any questions that have come up or?
I just have a comment as a new commissioner. I did one of the new commissioner onboarding sessions last couple of weeks back, and I really appreciate the information. The presenter was fabulous. And just an opportunity to network in between PUD members and commissioners has just been a really great opportunity, especially for someone who's new to being a new PUD commissioner, as well as just learning the ins and outs of our roles and our governance policies. And it's just been a really great experience thus far. So I look forward to February.
Yeah, I was gonna say, you know, you'll be back.
I will be.
At least one time. And yeah, when I started, we didn't have such great training. So I have not attended regularly, but all the ones of the trainings I've attended, I've always learned something. So you can always, it's always helpful. So thanks again and have a good rest of your meeting.
Thank you. Okay, next up is audience comments. If you're in the audience tonight wishing to offer comments, please step on up to the podium. And if you're on Zoom, you can raise your hand, but it looks like that's all staff, so. That we will go to the manager's report.
All right, thank you, Commissioner. Good afternoon, everyone. I feel like we should pause here because, yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's okay. We'll give you a bit of time here to
Thank you so much.
exit gracefully, right? Yeah. Thank you all for coming. Thank you. Have a good drive back.
Good night.
Just for the benefit of the other two commissioners, so we met. We didn't call it a meeting, we invited the president, but we met with the staff at 3 o'clock. And we had some good dialogue with some selected staff just about. They were interested to hear from us, you know, what kind of things can they help us with? What kind of things can they do to improve our operations or operations in PD in general? And George Kahn told me after the meeting that this was the biggest meeting he's had when he's gone to the PUD. So we invited a lot of staff and he found the information really useful. So feel like that was useful. And yeah, you're getting PUD bombarded with PUD information all over the place. So this doesn't happen every year. It's the first time they've come around. So don't get used to it.
Yeah.
But it was good. So it was nice for them to come. I think last night they were in Clallam. They went to Clallam PUD. They have their meeting yesterday afternoon, and then they came over here today. So yeah, it's a nice offer, and it's nice to have them here. All right, we do have a lot of other things on the agenda, so I'm going to do a manager report, but it won't be too long. Updating on just some meetings and other things going on. So we did attend, a few of us attended the open house up in Bellingham that Congressman Larson invited us to. And it was in recognition for support, for getting us a $2 million in appropriations for the Alger water line relocation. So that was really beneficial for us to go, I think, just to get the FaceTime with Congressman, say thank you. And, he's going to continue working with us and for us for other things. So that was really helpful. Kevin was there along with two commissioners. We're going to continue our lobbying efforts. So on Thursday, Commissioner Linquist and I are going down to Olympia. Our lobbyists set up some meetings on Thursday. We're going to spend the day traveling between offices. The focus is going to be on additional funding for utility relocations because of the fish passage projects. And verbally, we've gotten support from our local legislators. So now's the ask to be a sponsor. We're going to do that specifically, and then we'll submit our funding requests probably next week. Other meetings, so I met with the Mount Vernon School District Superintendent and Mayor Boudreau to continue our discussion about the playfields and the existing building. So that meeting was last week, and it was a good meeting. We're making good progress, and we should have an agreeable solution in the next few weeks. So I won't get into any more detail, but things are progressing.
Hey, Jill was
well.
very excited about that last night, I will add.
Yes, Mayor Boudreau came to the open house as well, and she's working on our behalf at the same time as the cities is what it would seem. So that's good. Last week we had a good work session here for the new commission orientation. We're going to do another one next Tuesday, 4 o'clock, and then we'll finish up with the other department managers. So come with more questions and whatever else comes up. Quickly, we're still in the process of hiring for positions, maintenance superintendent, GIS, asset analyst, and billing clerk. We've got postings out for staff on the maintenance department on the crew. So put the word out if you know anybody that might be interested. The horizontal directional drilling will resume for the transmission line in the next couple of weeks. So the pipe is out there. We should see the contractor mobilizing shortly. And then just to touch on some items that are in the information section. Just do this one. I just want to draw attention to it. Brian might cover this when he talks about the uncollectible accounts, but there's an AP&P on procurement of goods and services for federal awards. There's no changes to the actual language in there, so nothing was track changed in there. It's just that attachment, which is guidance from the federal government if we get federal funding. So that was the only change to that colorful 2-page attachment that's in there. So just to clarify what was there. I did, just because we've had a lot of change on the board, I updated the memo designating an acting GM in my absence. So that's in there as well. And the goes to Kevin, and then if we're both absent, it goes to Brian, and then in the event that all three of us are absent, it goes to Mike Fox. So that's in place until changes. So you might remember this from last year. We received an award from Department of Health last spring, the 20-year Treatment Optimization Performance Award. We got another 20-year award from Department of Health this year. They just keep moving the band of the 20 years. So we'll continue to get 20-year awards because they don't have a name for anything greater than that. But we were recognized by Department of Health in their newsletter last week. So great job to the treatment plant and all the staff up there, because it is still a big deal to get 20 years in a row of optimization performance. There's only 4 utilities in the state that get it. So it's still a big deal. And then just lastly, our previous general manager, Bob Powell, passed away, I think on January 7th. So I sent the notice out to everybody. I sent it to you guys as well. I think Kevin posted something on the website also. I could not find anything in terms of a service or memorial or any information like that. So I don't have anything else to pass on. I just think it's worth noting that he passed, and I know he lived in Lacona with his wife, and haven't reached out to them, but yeah. If you get any information about anything, staff has been asking and other people have been asking me as well, in case you hear anything locally. And that's it for me, unless there's any questions. Go.
All right, Jay.
Good evening. I'm going to go through a very brief update for my department. I know you guys got to hear from me a little bit during the orientation not too long ago. So I'm not going to rehash too much if I can avoid it. So with that, away we go. We're going to start right off with some of the things that my department was able to help or collaborate in order to get done this last year. We were able to take a look at all of our tanks in our system and do at least a preliminary assessment for safe access and also seismic resiliency, and make a lay kind of a lay assessment of the condition for those two subjects on all of our tanks. So give us a starting point with which to inform some improvement work that we might have going forward. So that was a big undertaking. Part of the things that came out of that is a request for qualifications for doing a seismic resiliency retrofit on clear well number 3, which is our largest clear well up on close to Judy. We also have a RFP out for doing ladder improvements on 9th and Highland, which is one of our largest reservoirs in our system, and also for Rockport Town Tank, which was identified in a risk and resiliency assessment in 2021 as being a high opportunity for us to improve. So those we're going to start off with small baby steps, trying to make these improvements and hopefully gain some momentum as the years go by. In your hands, I think I handed everybody a copy of the emergency procedures guide. That was a collaborative effort by many, many people, including our safety committee, and our managers took a look at that. Our Kevin Tate put his magic on it, as you could probably tell by looking at it. It was a big effort and undertaking, and that came out of a rewrite of our emergency response plan over the last couple of years. That is a direct extension of that plan, and its whole goal is to give our employees a sense of what they need to do in the very beginning moments of a fast-moving emergency situation. So we wanted something to come out of that, and this is one of those products. We also were successful in promulgating 3 new safety procedures and practices, including here in conservation, confined space safety, which is a big one for us, and incident and hazard reporting, which affects a lot of things. And I also managed to get the Water Distribution Management Manager 2 certified this last year, which was pretty cool. So those are some of the bigger accomplishments. I'm sure there's other things I've forgotten, but I don't want to go too down in the weeds. But I did want to talk to you guys about something that does come up every single year, and that is our lagging indicators for safety ratings. We use a very complex formula. Actually, the insurance industry uses a very complex formula called the experience modification rate. This rate is what actually helps determine our industrial insurance premiums, what we're going to pay. And it's based upon how we perform, and it's expressed in a likelihood for us to meet a certain expectation of how we're going to perform with especially with our workers' compensation insurance. So 1.0, as you can see in the third bullet, is an expression that you are expected at 100% to meet the performance record, or the performance predictions that the insurance industry has made for you. Any numbers that fall below that is because we have experience that informs the insurance industry otherwise, that we're performing well enough, and we have for a long enough period of time that we are going to perform better than 1.0. So the lower that number is, the better. And I'm going to show you a chart that kind of shows our performance over the last few years. And it has a huge impact on what we pay for our insurance premiums. It's a little tough to see, and I didn't think about that until I'm sitting here staring at it now. You can see the baseline 1.0 is the thicker line, and you can see our performance. This is 2014, 15, 16, 17, 18, and so on. And the last couple of years, we've actually been sub 1, I think it was 8.4, and then this year we're at 0.86. So we've been able to consistently perform and hover in and around that 1.0 for quite some time. We've had a couple spikes, we've had a couple of rough years as far as our experience modification, but the most important thing I take a look at as our average. I also look at that too. I use that to benchmark ourselves. So we've done a remarkably good job over a lengthy period of time of keeping our EMR low. And that does help us quite a bit, and it saves our ratepayers a lot of money in our insurance premiums. Another lagging indicator, this is a more classical one. It's called the DART rate, the days away restricted or transferred. And that's to describe when somebody gets injured or ill enough where they have to spend time at home collecting medical payment from L&I, or if they have to be transferred to another job or take light duty somewhere else in order to continue being a productive worker somewhere else, whether that's inside the district or otherwise. It's a far less complex formula. It's really easy to figure out, and it describes the number of workers per 100 that experience some form of that loss in a given year. And of course, our goal is always to go for zero on that. And I think you heard me tease it a little bit at the orientation that we were lucky enough this last year to actually have a DART rate of zero. This is the first year that since I've been here that we've experienced that. That's me knocking on wood, and that's really all I can say about that. But you can also see it doesn't take much for a utility with 82, 83 people in it to have a huge fluctuation in the amount that DART represents. So another way that we have to look at it is also by benchmarking. So we benchmark our average, and right now our average is sitting at 2.93. So I'll be looking at 2023. And once we get to the end of it, I'll benchmark it again to see if we're keeping to that, being lower than that, or if I see a rise in that average. So at some point we'll be plotting the averages over time as well. Do you guys have any questions about these formulas? Because I know they're kind of weird and wonky, and they're very specific to the safety industry. Okay. Some things that are a little simpler to figure out: risk management. So in claims payable, which is something that I've done since I've been here, we've saved over $17,000 in claims cost. And this is just in 2022. So we paid out $4,000 to 8 claims, averaging to $500 per claim, which in our program, we try to keep our operating damage claims to less than $1,000 out of our operating funds for each claim. So we've met that goal over this last year. And I was also able to summarily reject 2 claims, which also helps as well. And I do that using a written program that guides which kinds of claims we accept and which kinds that we will reject. Under claims receivable, we were able to recoup over $34,000 in damages to the district in 2022. And that's a very significant number. So I'm very proud of that. It takes a lot of people to make that happen. Short and sweet. Does anybody have any questions for me?
Any questions?
No.
Awesome. Did you mention during the orientation the retro program?
A little tiny bit.
Okay, maybe just
Sure.
have we gotten a payment back from him?
It's been a while. So retrospective insurance programs they're an optional program that agencies and companies like ourselves can enroll in that are state approved through L&I. And their whole job is to actually look at our workplace performance and workers' compensation. And instead of us having to wait years for our EMR to lower, they actually will take a look at the last 3 years. And their whole goal is to arm wrestle L&I's notions of our predictions. And they actually get workers' compensation premium refunds on our behalf. So the better we perform, the more refund we see faster. And those typically happen every quarter. Sometimes we don't get those payments for a couple quarters. But as time marches on, we should actually see more and more frequent premium refunds. I haven't seen one in a while, George.
But we've got them in the last couple of years.
Yeah, and the last one that I got, I believe, was in the fall of last year, and it was I think it was a little south of $14,000 for a premium refund. So very worthwhile. It's very simple to do. And the retro company that we are enrolled with, Approach Management Services, also provides a lot of other services for stay at work incentive programs and a whole lot of other things. And they do it for a very low overhead of 3%. They take 3% of any of the refunds that we get back from the state as a surcharge. So to me, is a no-brainer. It's a good program. So they help us a lot too.
Thank you.
All right, thanks, Jay.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
All right, next up, Alistair. And this is approval of a contract with, or an update with Cayenta.
Yes, thank you, commissioners. This agenda item is looking to upgrade our current ERP system, which is Cayenta, to the newest version of it. Right now, we're currently 3 versions behind. And it's been completely rewritten. It's a new code base. HR function, the benefits function, and the payroll functions are all new and complete. Currently, when staff have to submit timesheets or leave requests, it's in a version that's web-based, that's using a form of Java that is not compatible with current browser versions. So we're having to go back and use legacy versions of our web browsers in order for it to work. And that's just not really a sustainable way in which we should be operating our software. We did look at some other options as a potential replacement to Cayenta. We're just right now in a place where we think it makes sense to stay with what we know, and we'll go ahead on and get that upgraded. It's going to take about 18 months once we get started, and we're looking to get started in the summer. And so that's the item up for your approval.
My other question, are there any what the annual costs are with,
We're typically looking at about 50,000
is that what we were paying?
prior to the upgrade. Yes.
Yeah, okay.
When was the last upgrade done? Just for reference, how long it's been?
A little more than 3. I don't know that we've upgraded since we've implemented. I think it's been about 3 to 5 years since we've done anything with it.
And then will this new version, will there be will this allow us to kind of consolidate some software services as well? Is there new modules? Is there new things that will help us kind of?
We're not consolidating any current services, but what we will be able to do is utilize modules that we aren't using right now. There are a couple of within the payroll function with the taxes that we aren't using that we'll be able to use. Believe there's Brian General Ledger, or right now we're using QuickBooks for some functions that we'll be able to use within this current version. So we'll be able to get rid of, I think, 2 pieces of software that we're using for other things, and we can consolidate it in there.
So I'm looking for a motion to approve the contract with Harris Computer Corporation in the amount of $295,160.
Well, I move that we authorize the general manager to enter into a contract with Cayenta in the amount of $295,160 to upgrade our current Cayenta implementation.
Okay, we have a motion. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And that is approved.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alistair.
Thank you, Alistair. Ryan, up next with the write-off of uncollectible accounts.
Good evening. Yes, this is the annual write-off of the uncollectible accounts. And I'll be asking for you to authorize the general manager to write off
$92,742 this year. Agenda item 9, I think you have some information in your memo. about the historical trends this year is about double what we did last year. Last year we did 43,000 and the year before that it was only 24,000. And as I've been speaking to you the prior year, it has to do with the moratorium, utility moratorium and not being able to shut off water. We had accounts that grew substantially larger than normal. And also during that long 2-year plus time period, there was a lot of transition in housing, rental housing in particular, that we just couldn't track because we couldn't turn off their water. And so bills were unpaid. At the end of that, we've been working through who owed the money and when they moved in, but unfortunately, that's resulted in a bigger write-off than normal. I will say that on just under $30 million of sales, it's less than half a percent of sales. So it's still a very small number that we've written it off. And historically, we send all of these accounts over to Skagit bonded collectors, and they will continue to work the accounts after our customer service customers are no longer doing it. And we get between $15,000 and $20,000 per year back. That's not of the 90,000, but of all the money that we've sent to our Skagit bonders over the last several years, current account. So when people go and trying to get credit for a car or a house, that's usually the time that they actually make payments and we actually do some collections, and that trickles in throughout the year. The other points of interest, I guess, we had a lot more accounts. We had 219 accounts and they averaged $423 in lost revenue or in write-offs. With an average bill between $120 and $150, you can see that it went beyond 2 billing cycles for a lot of those counts. And then below, I gave a breakdown by geographical region, and you can see we had even higher ones up in the concrete area. They were all averaged over $2,000. So fewer people, fewer accounts, but larger dollars, and they went on for a long period of time, unfortunately. So with that, if there's any questions, I'd be happy to take those. Otherwise, it is a vote of the board for authorizing the general manager.
Well, I think we all knew this day was coming, and it's actually, I think, with where we saw that balance get to during COVID, I think a lot has to be said for customer service staff and for your staff for staying on top of this and, getting it to the level that it's at. So good job to everyone there.
Thank you. Any more questions for me?
Right.
A motion to approve and allow the general manager to write off the $92,742 from accounts receivable.
Second.
Motion is second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Then while I'm here, I just talked about the AP&P too.
Real briefly,
Okay.
there's no changes, as George mentioned. We're just adding Appendix A, and it started on page, I think, 4 or 71 in your packet. And again, it's largely due to the added scrutiny of the auditors with all the federal help and assistance that's gone out during the COVID era. That triggers $750,000 of federal funds, triggers an annual audit for the auditors, and they are going around making sure that everybody has updated their procedures and has this in their AP&Ps, mainly because of the federal dollars. So it's not anything new that the district hasn't been doing in the past, but it does outlaw the process that we will go through with any federal dollars that we're fortunate enough to receive, and that includes some state money because that pools some of the federal dollars too. So it does impact us on the larger projects. So, and if you have questions, you can ask me later too. That's right. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Let's see. So next up we have Mark and Courtney.
Yeah, I'm up here because I want to introduce Courtney. But first, I just want to talk about the cross-connection control policy manual. The first version of this was approved in 2020, and the purpose of that was twofold. One was to meet our obligation to the Department of Health to have a cross-connection manual and have that be part of our water system plan. The second point of having this was, in just a little history, we had gone through a fairly difficult negotiation with a customer who required cross-connection control. And we saw a lot of weaknesses in our prior approach by adopting the just the standard version. And so what this plan does is it removes a lot of ambiguity from the cross connection requirements so that they're dialed in, and we can just clearly say, this is what a residential property is, this is what a commercial property is. If you have this, then you need an RP. And there's our reasoning is I think pretty logical and well supported. And so it's made our job and hopefully our communication of cross connection requirements much easier to the public so that they understand it and they know what the requirements are before they undertake a project. In 2020, we also kicked off the incentive program, and we think we've had pretty good success with that, partnering with customers to bring their water services up to our current standards. And after the 2 years, the reimbursement schedule is included in the policy, and we feel like it's an appropriate time to relook at that and revise those amounts with your approval to reflect current costs today. Courtney is going to be giving you a presentation, just kind of an overview more or less on what cross connections are. And so hopefully this will just kind of get you introduced or reintroduce you into the cross connections and what we are concerned about. Courtney also does a summertime presentation out in the backyard with actual cross connection devices and flowing water. So maybe we can do that in the summertime as well. So Courtney's been working really hard on getting compliance this week with some customers, and it's easy to say, well, you just make some calls, but boy, she's been calling and emailing and visiting people, and it's really admirable, her effort to avoid a conflict and avoid having water shut off. So just really thank her for representing the district and looking out for the best interests of our customers, and well, all of our customers, both those who are having problems and the ones we're trying to protect. So Courtney, you're up.
Sweet.
Just real quick, are you guys looking for any action on this tonight?
Authorizing the
Okay, go ahead and authorize the revision. Sorry.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, commissioners. So yeah, like Mark said, just kind of want to give a very brief overview of cross connection and backflow, and then end with our current policy and the revisions that we made to that. So there we go. So some basic definitions. Backflow is the undesirable reversal of the normal flow of water. Backflow prevention assembly is a device that will prevent that undesirable substance from a property or private plumbing system from going backwards and getting into the public or potable water supply. And that occurs through a cross connection, which is any actual or potential physical connection between public water system and any source of non-potable liquid, solid, or gas. So under normal conditions, water's flowing, everything's pressurized, everybody's great, everybody's drinking water. But sometimes unforeseen circumstances can actually cause the reverse to happen. There's two different hydraulic conditions that will cause backflow. The first is back siphonage. This is actually a negative pressure that will create a vacuum. And you can see there's a pink tanker truck filling up. A main break just happened, caused a pressure loss and siphoned all of that toxic material back. And there's a tiny little guy in that house who just got burned in his shower from all of that coming back. And then there's another little guy right by the main break who had not isolated it yet and also got burned. The other type is back pressure, which is everything's fine, but there's a temporary connection being made right now with a propane tank off of a fire hydrant. And the propane tanks are at a much higher pressure. They're at 90 PSI, system pressure is at 60. That pressure causes that gas to force its way back into the distribution system. So now there's propane in the public system. makes its way into some houses that cause a fire and actually cause a washing machine to explode, and somebody got thrown to the wall. So those are the animated illustrations there are from 2 actual events that were from like the 90s, early 2000s. There actually are more recent ones too. There was just in 2019, City of Spokane, they had some residents reporting a green tent and fibers floating around in their water. And upon further investigation, they found out that a hydro seed truck was pumping water, hooked up to a fire hydrant, pumping, and the pressure with the pump caused all of that hydro seed to get back and go through the public water system, made its way into a mobile home park, I believe, and over 100 residents were affected. I don't think anybody was hospitalized, but just another example of how it still happens. Skagit PUD 2021 had 3 water quality complaints about air in the water, and we investigated, and all 3 were caused by the same, not the same, but same cause of improperly winterizing an irrigation system. So landscapers, we investigated, and yep, the day before, the day of, they had their landscaper there with an air compressor improperly hooked up, and air compressor is much higher, so it forced all that compressed air back into residential, exposing or opening up those faucets, lots of air. There was one site that was a big apartment building, and the air went back into their system, got trapped in, like, they had 4 big boiler systems that got trapped into there. So it took them a lot of work to either resolve that issue. Luckily it didn't make it into the public water system, but those are one of those examples that we've dealt with. Luckily there's some devices that will prevent that from happening. There's a double check valve assembly. It's got 2 internal independently operating spring-loaded check valves that are loaded closed, but when water's flowing, they'll open, allow water to flow. If there's a pressure difference and water tries to go backwards, check valves are designed to close, stop the water. They're only approved for low hazards like irrigation or fire systems, because if a piece of debris or anything causes those check valves to fail, water can keep going and get back through each check valve. So they're only approved for low hazards. The higher level of backflow prevention assembly is a reduced pressure backflow assembly. It also has 2 spring-loaded check valves, but it's separated by a zone of reduced pressure with a relief valve that even if water tries to go backwards and if a piece of debris causes that second check to fail, it's designed to fail to where the relief valve it's spring-loaded open. So the flow keeps it closed, and then if it senses a pressure difference, that relief valve will open and it will dump out the bottom of the assembly, and there's no way for it to keep going and getting into any upstream process. Because of that relief valve, they have to be installed above ground. You can't have it underground, so then that water is just going to submerge itself, and then it will defeat the purpose. So they have to be above ground. Anytime you get piping above ground, they have to have its own little enclosure to protect it from freezing and other damage. So there's more cost associated with the enclosure part of that, but much higher level of protection for all high hazards. It protects against low and high. So our current program, its purpose is to protect the public water system. And prior to when our policy passed in 2020, we kind of just operated in accordance with, there's Washington Administrative Code and Cross Connection Control Manual, which the Pacific Northwest section of American Water Works Association puts out. There are still some recommendations versus gray area of those 2. And Department of Health will be the first to tell you that those 2 lay a perfect foundation, but that it's up to the purveyors to establish their own policies and procedures related to that. So we got in 2020, our policy passed, kind of eliminated the gray areas in those 2, the Washington Administrative Code, and the main one being non-residential services, putting our policy together for a clear table to communicate what our requirements are. And the non-residential services is kind of more and more an industry standard, having that protection device at the meter for all non-residential to protect against changes in the future or different issues that go with us just being the water purveyor and not the city and all those kind of things. So that really helped our standardizing our requirements and bringing consistency to how we make those calls. So then there's also, once we got that policy in place, it's kind of implementing it and having a structure in place of what that looks like. So for new services, we get the chance to interview all the applicants and figure out what they're doing, what they want service for, and determine the appropriate level at that time. So all new services get backflow prevention assembly. For existing services, we monitor permit-driven activity and then notify the customer and kind of establish a separate timeline because we're not the permitting agency, but we use that or customer calls. But those are kind of where a lot of effort goes into bringing existing services into compliance. Each assembly that we're tracking has to meet the annual testing requirement, which is a Washington law. Because it's a mechanical device, it can fail over time. So that test is a third-party certified Department of Health tester. They come out and test the assembly. It has to be done once a year. So we send out reminder notices. And then if we don't get record that you got your assembly tested, you get multiple past due notices. And then finally a final notice saying we haven't gotten anything and you're scheduled to be disconnected. So the enforcement of installing new on existing and the testing requirement, it can often be costly or unexpected by customers. And part to mediate that is we came up with the incentive program that provides some financial reimbursement to existing customers who are either required to or want to voluntarily bring their service into compliance. So we do a lot of community outreach. I worked with Kevin to kind of get some nice brochures put together. We can hand them out at pre-application meetings, or the program is required to submit an annual summary report to Department of Health, and they have a list of categories that are required to have that level of protection. And we have to report how many farms do you serve, how many dentists do you serve, do they have an RP at the meter? Yes, no. So we target a little bit with the incentive program is we have a huge ag community. There's a bunch of farms and dairies that don't have protection. So kind of with that incentive program, trying to bring those services and protect the system. So with that program in 2020, we had 17 new installations that received reimbursement for a total of 31,000. In 2022, there's only 8 installs that got the incentive program for 17,000, and then 2023 budget is for 30,000. And part of the revision to that is to kind of match the market with, I review when people want the incentive program, I'm looking over all their invoices. So even if they exceed what we'll reimburse them, I'm still seeing what their total is. And some of them, yeah, cost of those is, there's a lot of variables. So we're just asking for not a whole budget increase, but just per person reimbursement to kind of match what the current standard is. So it bumps the RP from 2,300 up to 35, and then the double check from 1,100 up to 1,500.
Is that material cost only, or does that include labor?
Everything is included except for electrical and non-contracted labor. So there's got to be cost documentation. And the electrical is definitely the highest invoice line on that, just because, but we recommend don't require it. Some just insulate it really well and don't run electrical, but.
What percentage is that of most of the reimbursement requests that you get? I mean, out of the total cost to the customer, how much did that typically cover?
So there's such a variety in the ones that have come through. There were some where that covered all of it because they did their own work. They built their own enclosure, and they submitted an invoice for $500 for the assembly itself. Yeah. And then there's some where they had to run electrical and put in a 3-inch, and it was, 5,000, 7,000. So there is just a big range, but the goal and our intent was to try and get a number that covered majority of the cost for a standard 1-inch. The price of a 1-inch RP is like $500, And then a 2-inch, it goes up to like 1,400 for just the assembly itself. And then those enclosures are insulated fiberglass, and a standard one can be 1,200 to. We bought one for our 2-inch out here and it was like 2,500. So definitely pricey, but you're paying to keep it insulated and not freeze and crack and yeah, so those are pretty much, you took my clicker away. I think that's it. Yep. Is there additional questions? And the policy, I was gonna show kind of the track changes. I also gave it to Kevin to kind of do just a run through, and there's lots of little word changes, and so it was just too much of track. So, but there was only minor changes of the incentive program increase and yeah, getting rid of the details because we can just have those on our website now.
Say that again. So it's increasing the reimbursement limits, removing the standard details, and putting them on the website.
Yep, and I think there's one more listed on the memo.
In-premise protection allowed for residential fire sprinkler system.
Yeah, so typically we're premise isolation, we require it at the meter. There was discussion about when a residential customer only has one hazard, we require, like a fire system requires a double check, and so we would require it at the meter. But then realizing it goes into the house, branches off for their domestic and fire, and they're required to put in a double check right there. So because there's only one hazard and it's not commercial, you know, it's residential, we want to allow an in-premise isolation device to not make the customer have two. So adding some clarification there.
Then some minor text needs for clarification.
Any questions?
No, I would just say I'm happy to see it. I appreciate the agile, the approach to be able to say we had a fix and we found a better way to do it. And thanks for bringing it forward and well articulated. So thank you.
I just want to echo what Mark said earlier about Courtney's involvement. I think she's made a lot of effort to keep customers from getting disconnected. Because that just creates a whole separate round of issues that you might get involved with, Mark and Courtney have to get involved with. So the effort that Courtney puts in to get people into compliance is well worth it. This week is a good example.
Yeah, I think we had over 100 people got a final notice, and then I hand delivered phone call. We got an IVR, the automated voicemail or message going out that got a lot of callback. My notices go to where the water bill goes. So often with big corporations, it's a corporate black hole. So those visits, it's a lot of work, but it does definitely, beneficial.
So from 100,
So
you
from
got
100, we were almost 2 today, and then made more phone calls and some threatening emails and got a response. So
got it down to 0.
yeah. So we got shut
Very
down.
good.
That's perfect.
Great.
Yeah.
And then of the people that have been utilizing the incentive programs, I mean, have those been farms, or are you seeing more usage from voluntary?
Mostly non-residential, like commercial sites, because not a lot of permit activity goes on. I mean, just that
Yeah.
I've been involved with. So most of them are, just standard commercial sites. A couple residential where they are on a well is something that also requires that, even if it's not connected, if it's on the property, you have to assume the potential for that. So I think that would be what the most common, and most of them are all through pre-applications to where they're required to do it and they apply for the incentive and get money back. I think there's been one industrial customer that voluntarily, just through the outreach, I had a lot of conversations with people during that outreach, and it's just kind of continuing that, and especially with working like with the other engineering department of doing some kind of follow-up on the initial conversations, and because they kind of have to, goes both ways. So
And then the very last question I have is, what is the turnaround time? So say somebody has invested, X amount of thousand into this PRV, and then I'm applying for my incentive reimbursement. What's the time they should expect to see that?
Yeah, so if I get, it depends on if all the cost documentation is, submitted nicely and has everything. Sometimes it's not a paid invoice, but once I get that submitted, it's 1 or 2 weeks and a check's in the mail.
Oh, wow, that's fast.
Yeah.
That's great.
some of the line items in the vouchers that you see with people's names.
Are
They're,
those?
they're, yeah, related directly to their reimbursements.
Awesome. It's great. Thank you.
So I'll be looking for a motion to authorize revisions to Appendix F, Cross Connection Control Policy Manual.
Well, I move that we authorize revisions to appendix F, cross connection control policy manual.
And I second.
Motion a second, all in favor, signify by saying aye.
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 Thank you.
Opposed?
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Courtney.
Thanks, Courtney.
Okay. George mentioned the informational updates in the packet there. I would like to recognize former Commissioner Littlefield in the audience with us tonight. Any other commissioner comments?
Yeah, I just, sorry. I want to thank Bill and Mike today for taking me on a tour of different parts of our system and going to Gilligan Creek. And I just am really excited to get boots on the ground and see more of our system and learn more about the history and what our current project load is. So.
Very good. With that, we will adjourn at 5:45 PM.